Welcome back to the Self-Esteem and Confidence Mindset podcast with me, Johnny Pardo. Today, I have a very special guest with me on the episode. So welcome, Master Lama Rasaji.
Well, nice to be with you, Johnny. Looking forward to doing your podcast with you and sharing with your audience, and anything I can do to help your people. I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. Brilliant. And really looking forward to this conversation as well. Going to be an education for us all. And I know we're going to get a ton of value. So appreciate your time today.
Sure.
So I'll just do a quick introduction to today's episode, and then we'll go straight into the conversation. So today's guest is Master Lama Rasaji, as I've mentioned, who is one of the only 12 Master Lamas in the world. He lived and trained at the original Tai Chi Gong Lamasery. Is that how you say it in Tibet?
Yeah, Lamasery, that's correct.
Awesome. So Master Rasaji has been trained in Lazu's regenerative health system for more than 50 years and has been teaching for over 40 years. This is a health system for longevity that has been passed down from teacher to student in an unbroken lineage for more than 3,000 years. Awesome. So we've said a little bit about yourself there, but I'm sure it would be even more valuable if you could share with us a little bit about who you are and what got you to this point.
It's an interesting thing. Sometimes I look back, and time today absolutely seems like it's speeding up, and it's hard to believe that's the journey. But the biggest part of the journey started when I was ill as a child, and I was battling different issues with kidneys and lung and stuff. And I had major kidney surgery in '68. I was 12 years old at the time. During that kidney surgery, I had what people would refer to as an out-of-body experience. And in that out-of-body experience, I met several beautiful souls. And along with that, I met my Master Lama, who later, 5 years later, I was going to meet him in the physical in New York City, in Washington Square, just right outside the Soho district. I walked up to the gentleman. He didn't grab my hand. He grabbed the inside, Johnny, my forearm, and he kind of pulled me toward me. And he said, "Rasaji, what took you so long?" And I said, and the name sounded familiar to me, but I was wondering, why in the world is he calling me this strange name, right? Excuse me. And then later, we spent about 6 months together, and I was training, and I'd usually go Tuesdays and Thursdays. I was in the entertainment business at the time. I was dancing off Broadway. Professional dancing took me to New York, and I lived there off and on for about 5 years. And every time I had a chance to miss a cattle call, I would go study with the master. And I guess the second thing that really shook me and shook a lot of the students was about 6 months into training one day on a Saturday morning, usually only about 9 to 12 serious students would show up, as I began doing the slow motion dance that a lot of people see that looks like you're dancing through water, but you're just moving slow motion in air. And I made a turn to face the master. And when I did, it was no longer 1975 in New York City. I was seeing pagodas behind him. He was dressed in an attire totally different, like ancient Chinese. And the next thing I knew, I was kind of losing consciousness. And as I did, the students around me could tell that. And one grabbed me underneath this arm and they kind of eased me down. And as I was laying down, I could feel myself going through a tunnel, spinning. And it was like I was having some kind of vertigo or motion sickness experience. And I could hear a couple of the students saying, "Master Bo Young, what's happening to Rasaji?" And he goes, "Oh, he's awakening and remembering who he is and what he came here to do." And so I had a phenomenal experience that day. And that experience led me to what's called, a lot of people familiar with the term bilocation. I actually had a tri-location that day, where a part of my spirit and body was in three places simultaneously. And what was profound about that is that there were witnesses of 6 or more people, Johnny, at each location. So that, to say the least, kind of really shook the foundations of my faith, my belief. And I almost thought about not coming back. And then I got to thinking about a week later, I said, this guy led me into this stuff. Obviously, he knows what's going on. So maybe he can enlighten me and make me feel a little bit more grounded, because I had to say, at that time, I was a little bit out of sorts. I trained with him about 1.5 to 2 years longer, when he says, I got good news and I got bad news. Well, I don't know what Chinese zodiac you're born on, Johnny, but I'm born on the sign of the monkey, and the monkey likes adversity, and the monkey's kind of witty and playful. And I said, give me the bad news first, right? He says, well, my visa's run out, and a couple of months I'm going to have to go back to Tibet because I've got things I need to do. And I said, well, what's the good news? Because I was really getting attached to this guy. He was like a second father to me. And he said, oh, I want you to travel with me. And I'm going, really? Go to Shangri-La? Because the only thing I'd ever knew is I had seen the Lost Journey movie in, the Shangri-La in Tibet. And I thought, okay, yeah, I'll do that. So I ended up about a year later going to Tibet. And I stayed about 3.5 years in the monastery. And it was phenomenal. I did Tai Chi practice every day. 2 days a week, we would go pick herbs. I learned to take a mushroom, and a fungus that was growing on the mushroom was called Cordyceps sinensis. And I learned how to take that, grind that down, turn it to a tincture, and turn it to a tea and drink it. And, and I learned all these medicinal things, and it was phenomenal. I stayed there about 3 or 4 years and had what I referred to my first 45-day challenge, which I'm always talking about, the 45-day challenge. And they put me on a mountaintop at the end of my first year in Tibet, which was the end of my 4th year of training. And I had no other human being around me. I was just turning 20 years old. I always tell people, imagine where you were at 20. Well, I was on a mountaintop with not another human being, about 9,000 elevation, meditating and doing yoga and Tai Chi in a hut that monks had done for hundreds of years. And that's where I was. And when I come walking down that mountain on the 46th day, my mental clarity was like, oh my God, this was amazing. I felt like a newborn baby, but yet I had this mental clarity that was incredible. So that's, Johnny, that's how I got started. And that's what began to change the direction of my life.
And such a young age to get started there.
Yeah.
I should certainly know what I was doing when I was 20. I was, probably a pretty standard, university life, to be honest, partying and everything like that. That's incredible. And so for you, what kind of took you on this journey? Was it instinct? It felt right? Was that kind
of when today, looking backwards, as they say, hindsight's 50-50, right? So when you look back, I can make a case that early dreams and early visions, that I was aware that a being was around me at all times. I would open and close my eyes in the middle of the night, and I would see this Asian looking gentleman, and I would know that something was going on. When I had the out of the body experience in 68, I even recognized him then. I didn't know how or why at the time, but I did. And of course, I'd been in a lot of pain and discomfort. So being out of your body and not feeling that pain, whoa, that was refreshing, to say the least. And I'd always, even as a child having pain, I'd always wondered about the concept of life after death. Was it real? People talked about it. I was raised Christian growing up as a young child, but I didn't know for sure that was the case. Well, guess what? I knew firsthand experience, my physical body function stopped a couple times on the operating table during that out of the body experience. And then in the tri-location experience several years later, it showed me that awareness was everything. And the perception awareness was probably even more important. I remember my second year in Tibet, Bo Yang, the headmaster, looked at me and said one day, he said, Rasaji, there's really only one true miracle, and all other miracles are predicated on the one miracle. And I said, what is that, Master? And he said, a change in consciousness, a change in awareness, change in perception, and everything changes. And so, I realized the longer I begin to meditate, the longer I begin to pray, and the longer I begin to do my Qigong exercises and learn to connect with this energy we call Qi. In India, they refer to as prana, like pranayama. It had an intelligence in itself, and its intelligence was much higher than my physical intelligence was. And I realized this is the same intelligence that artists draw art from. We see proteges when they're in their teens, and we wonder, how in the world can they play music like that? And how in the world can they paint and draw like that? And they're barely into their teens. And you start to realize, well, this energy field that I was working with, that I learned surrounds your healthy body in about 7 feet from your sternum in every direction. So some people refer to it as an auritic field. We call it the energy body in the physical body. And it's connected through the acupuncture meridians, but also it's connected to the central nervous system. And I remember, as I studied scripture a lot when I was young, and I even studied it more when I went to Tibet, and I asked metaphysical questions about scripture, right? And I remember years later, I went to India because our roots, Johnny, come from 3 yoga disciplines. So we have Pranayama Yoga, which is the ability to breathe energy and not just air. Prana actually means life over death. Yama is the name for death, or Lord of Death in Sanskrit. Hatha yoga, everybody knows about hatha yoga, conditioning and stretching yoga, and then Kundalini, which is Indian yoga. And so the first great yoga master who started our system was disciplined in these 3. Well, they sent me there for 4 years to get to the roots. They were preparing me for a Lama, even though, Johnny, I didn't know I was becoming a Lama. And so I went there to learn those 3 yoga disciplines, which in turn deepened my meditation. It showed me that the energy field that feeds our physical body can make us more spiritually aware. It can give us energy. I also learned that, most people know all about nutrition on a DNA level. But I learned that there's also psychic nutrition, and there's also spiritual nutrition. In ancient India, they had a ritual where they would paint 3 stripes across their forehead. They called that the chanda. And they would paint 3 stripes, spirit, mind, and body. And then they would put a magenta dot right at the root of the nose and the third eye. And they'd say, spirit, mind, and body are but one. And then, so what happened is I began to take Sanskrit and look at the Bible as if Jesus was trying to speak to us, not just from a Christian point of view, but from a universal point of view, a metaphysical point of view. And then I began to recall, and as I put the 2 together, I realized, and the Lamasery course gave me a lot of guidance on this, that this concept that Jesus always talked about, second birth, was really the Kundalini metaphysical transformation, Johnny, that city yoga masters in India had been talking about for thousands of years. And I learned an enormous amount in India about this. I studied with a Sanskrit scholar, learned a little bit of Sanskrit. He was an Ayurveda master and professor in the art of Ayurveda, which has been around and healing people with herbal medicine and stuff for thousands of years, way before modern medicine. As a matter of fact, I joked today, I said, how in the world can what I do be considered alternative healing and alternative way of life when the Western medicine's only about 300 years old? I mean, and they're really the alternative, right? We've been around forever, because what I discovered through this energy is nature is amazing. And we refer to it in the Lamasery, two things. Nature is God's playground. Anybody that spends time in nature long enough feels childlike and doesn't want to leave. And nature is also God's pharmacy, because the Heavenly Father placed in nature a compound to heal anything going on in the physical body. So I call that God's pharmacy, right? And so long before we had aspirin, we had Scutellaria root and acacia bark from ancient India that was used in Ayurveda medicine for an anti-inflammatory. And then what happened was the Western world created this pharmaceutical engine that took a synthetic molecule and added it to Scutellaria root or skullcap to try to accelerate the delivery system. The difference is they don't know what that molecule will do in your system long term. One thing we know about Scutellaria root is it's like food, and the body will use what it needs and it will just eliminate the rest, but it will not create an imbalance or what's referred to as a side effect. There's only side benefits. So, you know, if I'm having a heart attack and I'm picked up by 911 by rescue, yeah, I want somebody to slip an aspirin or a nitroglycerin under. I don't want them to give me an herbal remedy that over a long period of time could create the same effect, because you need help right then. But most people don't understand that herbs in themselves are broken down to three classifications. And there are food grade herbs, which we look as whole food, we can eat anytime. There are seasonal herbs. Very common, popular seasonal herb that most of the world knows was the first herb that I took in 1969. My martial art instructor came out. I had been out of the hospital about 6 months. My dad read this magazine, Johnny. He says, get your children into yoga and martial arts, and it'll build stamina. Well, we walked into a martial arts school. I was sleeping about 13 hours a day at the time, just turned 13 years old. And my dad related to the martial art master what was going on with me. So he brought out a jar about this big with a root about this big, and it was 100-year-old ginseng root. And he looked at my father in 1969. He says, I want 3 Benjamins for this root. Right? My dad reached in his pocket, his hand shaking. You know, $300 in 1969 was a chunk of change, right? You inflate those dollars today, that's a pretty penny. My dad said, I need this for my son. He said, look, take the juice, an ounce in the morning, afternoon, and evening. And when all the liquid that's preserving the root's gone, cut the root up, let him chew it up 2 or 3 times a day, a small piece, get the pulp, swallow the pulp, and then spit it out. On that one herb, in 6 months, I went from sleeping 13 hours a day to sleeping about 9 hours a day. I went from doing most of my martial art training in a chair, Johnny, to do it standing up. And I was doing everything else the other kids were doing. My dad was like flipped out. He goes, okay, son, if you want to go that direction, you go that direction. Well, the medical and scientific field calls that the alternative. I call that the natural way. That's the way God intended for us to go, John.
Amazing. Yeah, taking 4 hours off of that 13 hours. Incredible. So I wanted to touch on the kind of obviously multiple yogas you've talked us through. Really interesting, and obviously tried a different couple of yogas, not to that extent, but in my life, which it's always good to kind of get that kind of easing your mind a bit, but also loosening off a little bit. And there's obviously the different ones you said form different benefits, but meditation's obviously something that most people I've certainly followed in the personal growth world, or people I admire, talk about and put a lot of time into. So what would you say to someone who's perhaps wanting to thinks or believes they should be doing meditation and wants to, but that they're struggling with it to begin with? How do you ease them into it?
Well, it's a funny thing, but this is very popular, especially to the Western mindset. When I think of most of the Western mindset, I include all of Europe to all of America, right? Because that mindset greatly changes from the time you get on the other side of the Mideast, and how they feel about meditation, their mental observation of it, even their approach is different than the whole Western continent, what we would refer to as the civilized world, right? So as you know, I spent 10 years in third world countries, primarily in Asia, India and Tibet and Hong Kong, Philippines. The average Westerner's mindset is, I sit down to try to be still, and my mind wants to run like a monkey and jump like a monkey. Like, what do I do to get that? Well, I tell people, check out our 45-day challenge, like it says on the screen here, which is totally free. It's 20 to 40 minutes. Tai Chi Gong, I truly believe, was created for this age. It's almost like 3,000 years ago, they created an art to say, how are we going to get people to feel comfortable about slowing down? And it's kind of like you see a semi truck going, and those guys are supposed to have like 12 to 14 gears in their truck. And they're going down a mountain, and they see ice way in front of them. And if they don't start downshifting their truck way in advance, they know if they wait till they get there and they hit the brakes with the load they got in the back end, they're in big trouble. They know that, right? So these guys are master at clutching and shifting. As a matter of fact, by the time they're 60s, their shoulders are done from shifting, and their hips and knees are done from clutching. Usually they have to have shoulder and hip replacement, especially if they've done it 25, 30 years. But every one of us doesn't know it, but we have what's referred to as an inner clock. And with everybody, Johnny, that clock it could be moving like this, but with most people, it's moving like this, right? If you could find a way to take control of that inner clock, you could call it meditation. That's one approach. Tai Chi Gong is a meditation that starts first with your body instead of your mind. And the body is downshifting the inner clutch inside, so that you go a little bit and you go from like 14 to 12th gear. And then gradually do a little bit more. You go to 10th gear. What we have found is there's a place inside of you where you emotionally, psychologically meet the inner clock. And then you can start taking control of that clock. For the most part, most people don't know that clock is running them. And it's running them, for the most part, Johnny, unconsciously. In other words, they don't know that it's the driving force that gets them up in the morning, that gets them to go out and make the almighty dollar and do what it is, until they examine that part of it. So you're kind of in Tai Chi Gong, you're gradually downshifting and backing into yourself. I have seen the most scatterbrained people 6 to 18 months doing Tai Chi Gong, all of a sudden come to me one day and say, you know, Lama, I could not sit down and just meditate, but now I can sit down and meditate, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, no problem. Now, I asked my teacher one day, I said, what would you consider, Master Lama, deep meditation? He says, little Lama, when you can hear the blood flow coming out of the chambers of your heart, you'll be at intermediate level of meditation. Well, I never experienced that. I thought that was crazy until I was doing that first 45-day challenge I told you about on the mountaintop. About the 25th day, Johnny, I kept going deeper, and I realized that from the time I met him in 75 in Soho until the time in 1980, 5 years later, I did not realize that system had been slowing me down and taking me deeper and deeper. I was finally at the place. I sat down one day, and I remember I went into meditation like I normally did, started with breathing. And then I started hearing different inner sounds. And the next thing, I started hearing what sounded like a waterfall. And at first, I thought I was somewhere like on the beach in Hawaii or something. And the more I listened intently, I could hear that waterfall. Boy, it was strong. The next thing I knew, I was actually atoning, or at one-ment, they mean the same thing, with the blood flowing out of the chambers of my heart. It was one of the most beautiful sounds I ever heard. Now, I did that, and I said, I'll never forget when I'm walking down the mountain the 46th day, I said, I did. I heard it, Master. I heard it. And he smiled at me like a Cheshire cat, and he's laughing at me. And then about 3 years later, when I was back in New York, before I started doing the India hitch, he sent me a Western Union wire. This is long before internet and stuff. And he says, I want Rasaji to do this. Now, you've been to New York. You're going to really appreciate this story. Yeah. So he says, I want you to go every Friday afternoon from 1 to 3 in the afternoon. That's when the energy turns from solar energy into lunar energy, right? It's a shift in the day. He says, I want you to go there in that 2-hour frame every Friday at the corner of Broadway and 42nd Street. Now, anybody that's ever been to New York on a Friday afternoon knows that almost everywheres in the world are sold on the street corner. You can almost buy anything on a street corner. There's so much going on, chitter chat and everything. He says, I want you to go there, find a place to sit down, and I want you to return to the state of mind that you were up on the mountaintop years before. Oh my gosh, John, I'm telling you, it took me 6 months. Literally took me religiously 6 months. And I was almost, I could feel a part of me wanting to give up. I said, he's got to think I'm nuts to do this, right? But I remember how much I loved him. I remember how much he'd never been wrong, even when I was like challenging him. And I sit down there, and all the people that I normally heard walk by, it was like a little brick thing up, not far from a church. And I was just sitting there, and there, all of a sudden I returned to that vacuum, and I felt that giant chakra, that spinning vortex again, that is connected between dimensions. And I heard the waterfall again, and I knew I was back in my heart, and everything in the world. So I tell people, I said, listen, Tai Chi Gong is an inside game. It's an inside journey. The only way that you'll be okay with it if you're willing to take a look at yourself and you're willing to commit to doing a little bit of change. So we tell people just a tidbit, go to Rasaji.com. It's free. Say yes to this. It's 20 to 40 minutes a day. It doesn't cost you a penny. It costs you a little bit of time and a little bit of effort. But also, Johnny, say no to the negativity in the world for the 45 days. In other words, don't watch the retail news. If you're getting on the internet and people are playing stuff that's like agitating you, or friends are texting you, and you're seeing some political blog, or in other words, just tell them, look, I'm going to do a sabbatical with the Lama for 45 days, and I'll get back with you, but I'm kind of going to take it up. I'm telling you, read the testimonies, Johnny. Just go to Rasaji.com and read the testimony. The proof is, as my dad used to say, is in the pudding, right? Proof is in the pudding.
Love that. Yeah, it sounds like a fantastic challenge, which I'm going to put my name down for, certainly.
Good.
Exciting stuff. And I'm really impressed with the New York being able to reach those states as on the mountain in New York.
There you go.
We were having a conversation for the listeners before this, where I was just saying I've been to New York as well, so can totally relate how crazy. I love the city, by the way. I absolutely love it.
I do too.
It's absolutely, it's like London as well. It's a bit crazy at times. So yeah, very impressive stuff on that front. How would you, if someone, lots of us in this day and age, and I'm just thinking this is often something I hear, and I admittedly experienced this myself as well. We're often very much trying to get somewhere in the future. Most of us, it's a very common thing. Like it's often this, I'll be happy when, I'll be successful when. These kind of dangerous words. And I remember going through a lot of my 20s, and 31 now, but going through my 20s and always kind of playing those words to myself. Even though I had a good life in the present. But is this something you find is very common perhaps in the Western world these days, with people saying these kind of words that they want to get somewhere in the future? And
first of
all,
all,
to step back a little bit from that?
Yeah, well, here's the thing. We're always we're a goal-oriented society. The Western culture, think how goal-oriented we're, whether it's sports, whether it's business, whatever, we put a goal there. Nothing wrong with that. But when it's wrong is when we say, oh, I'm only going to be okay if and when I hit that, right? And a lot of times people never do. What are they supposed to do now? Not be okay the rest of their life, right? So when you throw a goal out in front of yourself, in a sense, you just initiated a new journey in your life. You basically have now made a covenant with part of your being. And you're saying, well, I'm going to do this to get that. That's fine, as long as not only you enjoy the attainment, but you enjoy the journey along the way. The problem is people forget to enjoy the journey. Now, major corporations. I mean, I was doing the Daily Lama that I do every day that goes out in our free emails. And I was doing the Daily Lama. It's about a 15, 20-minute video I do every day. And I usually shoot it a few days in advance. So I was doing today like the Wednesday Daily Lama. And I was basically talking about, this very thing that we're talking about. And so I was talking about mission statements and religious symbols, and how there's an interconnection between the two, that a lot of mission statements that companies use. And I recalled that there was this company, this insurance company in America that I knew for about 125 years. They had been this phenomenal insurance company, and they had kept the same mission statement in place. And they were always in the top 5 insurance companies. About 25 years ago, for better, for worse, they changed that mission statement to something totally different. And now they're not even in the top 25. And I said, there is a definite connection between changing their mission statement and they changing their level of success. See, what we have to understand is the basic premise that people, when they're on that step one of self-improvement, is thought is creative. I can either harness that and begin to ride that pony, or I can let an unharnessed mind think what it wants, do what it wants, whenever it wants. Or even if I want to be more unconscious than that, Johnny, I can just let everybody else think through me. And then I can act upon their thought processes. In other words, I can make the creativity of my mind the daily news. I can read the London Times or the New York Times and make what they're saying my thought process. And when you talk to the average psychologist, they're amazed that most of the people that they see, they realize that what they're thinking today, they were thinking the same thought processes a decade ago. And they say, the old saying is, if you keep doing the same thing, thinking you're getting different results, it's a definition of insanity. So the oldest yoga practice on the planet is to grab a pair of prayer beads and put them between your fingers and pick out either a mantra, an affirmation, a passage from some beautiful scripture, something you love about something, and recite them. Well, this practice is over 20,000 years old. It was called japa yoga, and these are called prayer garlands. And what you're doing by going through those 108 beads, you're telling your spirit and you're telling your mind, nobody else but me for the next 108 beads is going to program my mind, that I'm going to discipline my mind for this 108 days. I tell you, just 45 days of doing just that, Johnny, begins to change everything, because every master has said the same. Whatever you focus on long enough, you're going to become the thing you focus on. So when I got back early and said, enjoy the journey. See, our mission statement for the last 1,000 years in the Lamasery has been the health, wealth, and happiness of one human family. Health, wealth, and happiness for one human family. It's not saying male or female, black or white, married or single. It's health. Well, it's not saying different countries. It's saying we are all part of one universal family. And it's also, notice the health, the wealth, they're equally important, but this happiness. See, people think you've got to put off happiness. Back to what you were saying. Oh, I'm going to be happy when, right? No. Happiness is like everything else. It's an attitude. It's a mental adjustment. It's an attunement. You have to decide today that you deserve a happy life. And if you decide you deserve a happy life, guess what? You're going to start vibrating differently. And what really comes to us is what we feel and how we feel and what we put our attention on. If I can change my mind, and Johnny, I can change how I feel, then the things that show up in my body and in my life are now going to be part of that frequency and not the doom and gloom frequency.
Yeah, totally love what you're saying about feeling good now. And it's quite empowering to make that decision, right? And I certainly relate to my life and, clients I've worked with as well. When you're in that feel good mentality, it's like, oh, wow, someone's offered me this opportunity, that opportunity, rather than this kind of the struggle. Oh, what I just get that? Oh, I'll feel better. Oh, it's not happening again. Like, making that decision, that practice you just shared, really interested. One of my coaches is actually one of the top podcasts out there, but he was sharing us that practice. So I haven't seen that practice for a while, but two very wise people have now shared that with me. So,
well, I tell people when they sign up, all they got, and by the way, signing up is a big deal. You give us your email, right? And we give you access to the training, which is the video that explains it, the outline, but they also get my book in ebook form for free. They get it. So they get the whole book. And in that book, my first 2 chapters, I lay that very foundation about, okay, you ready to change because you don't like your life, you don't like your body, whatever you don't like, you have the power, step into your power, and it's time to change it right now. We're going to change it right now. We're going to do it together. And it's really, really powerful. And like, again, if people, they need some extra ammunition, read those testimonies and then ask yourself, hey, do I want some of that? Do I want some of that? And what you're doing is very positive. You know, you're putting out, you're bringing people on like me, and, you know, that's high in vibration. What you start to think long-term will change you for the rest of your life. But if you want happiness and you want to change your law of attraction almost immediately, it always comes down to what you're feeling, because human beings are feeling beings. Sometimes I refer to them as feeling monsters. We are determining, if I want something to change now, I got to change the frequency I'm vibrating. What is the fastest way to change the frequency? Change how you feel. Oh my God, Lama Rasaji, you have the empowerment to change this whole thing right now. Part of scripture that bothered me, Johnny, big time, until I got on the mountaintop in 1980 on my first 45-day challenge I was telling you, after 5 years of training, and I got up there. Part of it in scripture always bugged the heck out of me. Be thankful in all things, and you shall be made glorious. Be thankful. I'm thinking to myself, how do you be thankful when you just lost a loved one, or you just got divorced, or you just filed bankruptcy? How in the world? And then it hit me. It's just the change in that attitude. In other words, watch this. I'm going to lay this on your audience. They're going to love this one. And they're going to be so motivated to do 45-day challenge, it'll make their head spin. What about if the illnesses that the doctor just told you had, or the lack of money that the banker just told you had in your bank account, have to be really symptoms in your life that you're vibrating too low of a frequency that you could change in 24 to 48 hours? What would you do? You mean all I got to do is really change how I'm thinking and change how I'm feeling? And the 45-day challenge supports that. And I guarantee you, long before the 45 days comes about, you're going to be putting up a testimony on Rasaji.com. And you're going to be telling us that that's happening. And you're going to see it. What people have to understand, what is happening in your body and happening in your life, they're one and the same, because you're the conductor. If you want a new orchestra, you gotta write a new piece of music, and you gotta new conducting techniques, and then everything just changes. Believe you me, you're talking to a person who was on a deathbed. It changes. I'm telling you.
It definitely recommend. Definitely going to recommend, well, not only to myself to go and do it now after our conversation, but to the audience to check out the 45-day challenge. So obviously we got it on the screen, but for those listening, they can find it on your website. Is that
Right,
right?
Rasaji.com. That's
Yeah,
correct. That's
Rasaji.com.
correct. Yeah, that's RASAJI.com. Rasaji sounds like GI, but it's pronounced JI. Yeah, Rasaji.com. It means God's joy. And come visit us and hang out with us. We have a lot of fun, and they get free daily emails. And like I said, I do a video every day, and for that group. And we started doing that in May of last year, and it's grown to over 12,000 people now are on that email list that are getting that daily Lama. And it's a real blessing to watch what people are doing, and we're having a ball. We're absolutely just having a ball, and what people and good people like you, Johnny, and that have good spirits and stuff. And we always say, judge a teacher by the fruits of their labor. The Lama series says, judge the teacher's students by the fruit of the labor. Now you're seeing generationally is something really have an impact, because when you have people doing what you've been doing and they're having success, that's a whole different ball game when it comes to fruit of labor. That's a different ball game.
Awesome. Definitely a great source to check out. So is that the main place people can find out more about your work in this point?
Yeah, that's a main place. And then
Okay,
we're
cool.
all over social media. They just put in Rasaji, they'll find us, but Rasaji.com is our platform. And we have a Circle of Life free community, and we're just having a ball there. We're on the My Patriots Network, and it's a beautiful thing. And we're doing something really, really powerful, and just really trying to raise people's vibration. And like you said, choose happiness now. Don't choose it later. Don't say what Johnny was asking. Don't say, oh, I'm only going to be happy if this or that happens. No, you choose happiness now, and health and wealth are more likely to come to you than the other way around. This is what people don't understand. Yeah.
Great shares, and a ton more value we can get from yourself. So we'll be sure to put the links into all your sources to this episode as well.
Yeah, and let's do it again before too long.
Awesome, of course. So thank you so much for coming on today and sharing such amazing value. Appreciate you and your time today.
Thank you, Johnny. Love being with you, brother. You take care of yourself. God bless.
Of course. So that concludes today's episode, and we're going to wrap up today. But remember, work on your self-confidence every single day.